Council Representative Jackson Kynor reclined in his hover chair, his mandibles clicking with frustration as he scanned the vast galactic council chamber. The enormous dome-shaped room hummed with the chatter of over 200 species, communicating in a chorus of dialects, frequencies, and chemical signals. Some spoke through translators, others used bioluminescent patterns, and a few, like the gaseous Vrothians, contorted their entire forms into meaningful shapes. "For the love of the 7 moons," Jackson muttered under his breath to his aide. "Zirana, are we really going to waste another 6 rotations on trade routes while the Void Scourge ravages the Outer Rim? At this rate, we'll be debating proper etiquette for surrendering when they reach the Council homeworlds." Zirana's 4 eyes blinked nervously, her blue scales shifting to a deep purple as anxiety colored her expression. "Sir, please, the Council members might hear you." "And what exactly would they do?" Jackson scoffed. "Censure me? Form a committee to evaluate my attitude? Write a strongly worded letter?" He let out a laugh, a sound like small rocks tumbling down a metal chute. The Galactic Council, ruling over 3/4 of the known universe, a paragon of bureaucracy and indecision. The truth was, the Galactic Union of Cooperative Species had enjoyed almost 6,000 years of relative peace. Most sentient races evolved in similar environments: temperate worlds with moderate gravity, stable atmospheres, and almost no predators larger than a house cat. Their bodies were delicate, their temperaments calm, and their societies built around consensus and careful deliberation. All of this worked perfectly fine, until it didn't. "Look at them," Jackson gestured toward the central speaking platform with one of his forearms. Representative Varelis Tharkin of the Xanthar Collective is droning on about industrial waste regulations. The universe is literally being consumed by a hive mind of photoaging, and he's concerned about proper disposal protocols for synthetic polymers. "The Environmental Committee has been working on that resolution for 63 years, Zirana reminded him, her voice dropping to a whisper. "It's very important." 63 years, Jackson exclaimed. "That's exactly my point." He slammed a clawed appendage onto his console, causing a few nearby representatives to jump and glare in his direction. Sorry, he waved apologetically. "Console malfunction. Please continue ignoring the impending doom." The Grand Council had been formed with the noblest intentions. A democratic forum where all spacefaring species could resolve their differences, share technology, and advance into a bright future among the stars. For millennia, it had worked remarkably well. Disease was largely eradicated, poverty was rare, and war was almost unheard of. But then came the Void Scourge. It started as inexplicable stellar dimming in the Cygnus arm. Then, entire systems went dark. True to form, the Council appointed an investigative committee. By the time they submitted their preliminary findings 2 years later, 18 worlds had been lost. "The report is due for its first review next month," Zirana offered helpfully. "Magnificent," Jackson muttered dryly. "I'm sure the Void Scourge will patiently wait while we prove free." Jackson knew exactly what the Council needed. What the entire galactic community needed was something they'd never had to develop on their own: a warrior spirit, fighting prowess, the ability to recognize an existential threat and respond with anything other than another committee assignment. They needed help from the strange, terrifying creatures from the high-gravity, high-oxygen, predator-filled nightmare world that had been quarantined almost immediately after first contact 30 cycles ago. They needed the Death Worlders. They needed humans. "Trill," Jackson said suddenly, sitting upright as the idea solidified in his mind. "Pull up everything we have on Earth and see if you can find me Commander Chloe Vanson's contact information, the human observer." "But, sir," Zirana hesitated, her voice tinged with concern, "the quarantine protocols will be the least of our worries if we're all consumed by star-eating shadows." Jackson's mandibles clicked decisively. It's time we invited the monsters to fight the darkness. The emergency session of the Council was called 3 standard days later, after the Void Scourge consumed the Jaxler system. This time, unlike previous attacks, the star didn't fade gradually. One moment, it shone brightly. The next, it simply winked out. All 7 planets and their 16 billion inhabitants were gone in an instant. The normally lively council chamber was unnervingly silent as the holographic recording played. Even Jackson, who prided himself on his cynical wit, felt a cold shiver run through his exoskeleton at the sight. "What you are witnessing," announced High Chancellor Treller Nos Kirix, his translucent tendrils flailing in distress, "is the first confirmed visual documentation of a Void Scourge attack. The recording showed the Pelin Sun, a pleasant yellow G-type star, much like Earth's, surrounded by the shimmering defense grid of the system. Then, like ink spreading through water, darkness seeped into view. No ships, no creatures, just absence. Where the darkness touched, matter simply ceased to exist. "Pause recording," a voice called out. "Representatives, relax. Can we confirm this isn't some kind of sensor malfunction? Perhaps a transmission error?" Jackson couldn't contain himself. "A transmission error, really?" he scoffed. 16 billion citizens vanish, and your first thought is technical difficulties? Maybe they all just decided to turn off their lights and communication devices for a surprise party. His laughter echoed loudly and inappropriately through the chamber. "Representative Kynor," the chancellor reprimanded, his gelatinous body pulsating with irritation. "Your behavior is entirely inappropriate for a civilization facing extinction." Jackson stood, his hover chair groaning in protest at the sudden movement. "Look at the recording. Look at the data," he urged, his voice rising. "The Void Scourge isn't just destroying worlds. It's growing stronger and faster," Jackson muttered, disbelief tinging his voice. "The Jaxler system had our newest defensive tech, 3 military outposts, advanced early warning systems, and yet it was obliterated in under 6 minutes. A wave of murmurs swept through the chamber as representatives scrambled to confer with their aides. The Vrothian species huddled together, forming tight, anxious spheres, while the Zerithians and Karazthai began vibrating at frequencies signaling extreme alarm. "The Science Directorate's estimates," Chancellor Trellernos began, after order was restored. "Based on current consumption rates and observed travel patterns, the Void Scourge will reach the core worlds in just 47 standard cycles." "And what exactly is our response plan?" Jackson demanded sharply. "More studies? More sensors to monitor our destruction in higher resolution? Perhaps we should issue a strongly worded letter, asking the Void Scourge to kindly respect our borders." Representative Hannah Ryder of the Hijathra rose, her environmental suit, filled with water to simulate her natural habitat, glistening under the chamber's lights. "The Defense Committee is evaluating our options," she said, her voice gurgling slightly through the translator. "We've authorized an increase in production of our most advanced shielding technology." Jackson interrupted, his voice sharp, which failed completely at Pura. "We're also deploying our entire fleet to establish a containment perimeter," Hannah Ryder continued, ignoring his interjection. Jackson's tone dripped with derision. "Our fleet consists of research vessels, diplomatic cruisers, and cargo ships with barely functional defense capabilities. What are we going to do? Throw rocks at the Void Scourge to stop it? It consumes stars. We're seriously going to stop it with mining ships? Do you have a better suggestion, Representative Kynor?" Chancellor Trellernos's voice took on a rhythmic pattern, an unmistakable sign of deep irritation. Jackson scanned the room, taking in the frightened expressions of the species around him. Species who had never had to develop the skill for violence or warfare. Species that had never faced a true existential threat. "Yes," Jackson said, his voice dropping, becoming serious and quiet. "I have a suggestion. We need to request help from the only species in known space that evolved specifically to handle existential threats, the species that turns danger into opportunity, the species that, according to our own xenobiologists, considers mutually assured destruction a valid diplomatic tactic." A wave of shocked murmurs broke out across the chamber. "You can't possibly be suggesting," began Chancellor Trellernos. "I am," Jackson interrupted, his tone unyielding. "We need to contact Earth." "The quarantine was put in place for good reason," protested Representative Varelis Tharkin. "Have you read the reports on their world?" Jackson retorted. "They've fought thousands of wars among themselves. They hunt other species for sport. Their entertainment industry glorifies violence in graphic detail. They consume the flesh of other creatures for sustenance, and they survive. Whatever tries to kill them, they kill first," Jackson stated simply. "Whatever threatens them, they overcome. Their entire evolutionary history is one long story of facing extinction and saying no." Narek Shalan, who had been quiet until now, spoke up. "Sir, the latest intelligence suggests humans have developed a new class of military vessels. They call them planet crackers." A horrified gasp echoed through the chamber. "Perfect," Jackson said, his mandibles forming a semblance of a smile. "Let's invite the monsters to hunt our nightmares." After an intense debate that stretched nearly 26 standard hours, a remarkably swift decision by council standards, a small committee was hastily formed to review the initial first contact records with humans. Jackson insisted on being included. They convened in the archival chamber, a vast repository of knowledge stored in quantum crystals. Zirana activated the display, and three-dimensional images flickered to life around them. First contact occurred 57 cycles ago, archivist Lurana Veshk explained, her thin, papery skin rustling as she moved. A research vessel detected unusual transmissions coming from the third planet of a relatively unremarkable yellow star. Upon investigation, they discovered a civilization that had just achieved rudimentary spaceflight. The hologram displayed Earth swirling with blue, green, and white clouds. "Looks pleasant enough," Representative Owen Lancaster remarked, studying the image. "Appearances can be deceiving," Lurana replied. "Initial scans revealed the planet has approximately 1.1 times standard gravity, extreme temperature variations from -50 to +50 degrees on the standard scale, and oxygen levels that would be toxic to most council species." "What's truly remarkable," Jackson interrupted, "is that humans evolved in an environment where literally everything was trying to kill them. Predators, weather, geography, even microorganisms." The display shifted to show various Earth predators: lions, bears, sharks, and other creatures with terrifying numbers of teeth and claws. "These creatures shared the planet with humans," Lurana explained, "and yet humans emerged as the dominant species." "Not just dominant," Jackson added. "They hunted some of these predators to near extinction. They domesticated others and turned them into helpers. The rest they contained in preservation areas or used for entertainment." "Entertainment?" Representative Varellis Tharkin's exoskeleton visibly paled. "They would watch these predators from safe distances for fun?" Jackson's laugh was a mix of admiration and disbelief. "Can you imagine? Looking at a creature that evolved to tear you apart and thinking, 'Yes, I'd like to watch that while I snack on some food.'" The hologram shifted again, showing human physical characteristics. "Humans possess extraordinary endurance," Lurana continued. "They can pursue prey for days without rest. Their perspiration system helps them regulate temperature efficiently. Their bones are surprisingly dense, their muscles incredibly adaptable, and their psychological profile." The display shifted to show historical images of human warfare. Representative Hannah Ryder's environmental suit bubbled with unease. "They wage war constantly," Lurana explained, "or did until relatively recently. Over the course of their history, they've developed weapons of increasingly destructive power, often outpacing their moral development. Which is why the quarantine was put in place," Zilax added. "Our first assessment classified them as a potential threat to galactic stability. And yet," Jackson noted, "in the short time we allowed for cultural exchange before the quarantine, they showed impressive adaptability and curiosity. Commander Chloe Vanson, the human observer we allowed to stay, has been nothing but diplomatic." "One carefully selected representative," Zilax countered. Jackson gestured, and the display shifted to military assessments. "Their defensive capabilities are estimated to be at least 6 generations beyond our most advanced technology," Jackson continued, his voice laced with frustration. "Their understanding of weaponized physics borders on the supernatural. And most importantly," he paused for effect, "they have never encountered a threat they couldn't overcome." "That's not entirely accurate," Lurana interjected, her voice calm and measured. "Human history is filled with plagues, disasters, and tragedies that have wiped out millions. Yet, they persisted, they adapted, they created vaccines, warning systems, and emergency protocols." Jackson's mandibles clicked with excitement. "Exactly! That's what we need. A species that doesn't form committees when facing extinction. A species that bares its teeth and fights back." He glanced at the archival display, which showed one final image: a sleek, dark human military vessel bristling with weapon systems that even the council analysts couldn't fully identify. Jackson lowered his voice, a note of admiration slipping in. "This," he said quietly, "is what survival looks like." Hannah Ryder's environmental suit rippled as she sighed. "Very well. But how do we contact them without violating the quarantine protocols?" Jackson's compound eyes gleamed with an idea. "We already have a human among us," he said, his tone firm. "It's time we paid Commander Chloe Vanson a visit." The quarters of Commander Chloe Vanson were located in the diplomatic wing of the Grand Council Station. Unlike the lavish accommodations granted to other representatives, hers were stark and utilitarian, a concession to human preferences, or so the council believed. In truth, Vanson had repeatedly requested more comfortable furnishings, but her requests had a tendency to get lost in bureaucratic limbo. When Jackson, Zirana, and Representatives Hannah Rydor and Zilax arrived at her door, Vanson was engaged in one-armed push-ups while simultaneously reviewing intelligence reports displayed on a holographic screen. The gravity in her quarters was set to Earth standard, 1.1 times what the Council species considered comfortable. 598, 599, 600, Vanson counted, her voice steady and rhythmic. Then with a smooth motion, she rose to her feet. At just over 6 feet tall, she towered over the delegation. Her dark skin glistened with sweat, muscles rippling in a way that made Zilax instinctively take a step back. Council Representative Jackson Kiner, Vanson nodded, wiping her face with a towel. This is unexpected. Usually I have to file 17 request forms in triplicate just to get a meeting scheduled. Commander Vanson, Jackson began, his mandibles clicking nervously, despite his usual bravado. We come with an urgent matter. The Void Scourge has consumed the Jaxler system. Vanson finished the sentence for him. Yes, I've been monitoring the situation. My condolences for your losses. Jackson blinked, surprised. You knew. Vanson gestured to her intelligence displays. I may be quarantined here, but Earth still receives data. We've been following the Scourge's progress with concern. Then perhaps you also know we're defenseless against it, Hannah Rydor said, her aquatic suit bubbling anxiously. Vanson's expression remained unreadable, but something flickered in her eyes. The Council has over 2,000 member worlds, advanced technology, and resources beyond measure. But no understanding of warfare, Jackson said bluntly. No capacity for violence. No weapons that could stop something that devours stars. Vanson crossed her arms. And you think humans have such weapons? We know you do, Zilax chittered. Your planet crackers, your antimatter arsenals, your relativistic kill vehicles. A small smile touched Vanson's lips. You've been paying attention. Jackson stepped forward, abandoning all diplomatic formality. I'm going to speak plainly. We are facing extinction. The Void Scourge will reach the core worlds in 47 cycles. We have no defense, no strategy, no hope. His voice dropped lower. We need humanity's help. Vanson studied them in silence for a long moment. The only sounds in the room were the soft bubbling of Hannah Ryder's environmental suit and the nervous clicking of Zilax's exoskeleton. You quarantined us, Vanson said finally, her voice tinged with disbelief. Classified us as too dangerous for galactic society and now you want our help? Yes, Jackson said simply. Vanson walked to her viewport, gazing out at the stars. What exactly are you asking for? Jackson exchanged glances with the others before responding. Your most lethal ships, your most experienced warriors. Everything humanity has that can fight a war against an enemy that unravels reality itself. Vanson turned back to them, her expression now deadly serious. I'll need to contact Earth immediately, and the quarantine protocols will have to be suspended. Done, Jackson promised, without consulting anyone else. Consider your plea heard. Vanson's eyes gleamed with something the aliens couldn't quite identify, something primal and fierce. Humanity stands with the Council. Admiral Ethan Grayson stood on the bridge of the U.S. Nemesis, Earth's flagship, and the most advanced warship ever constructed by human hands. The view screen displayed Earth's combined defense fleet, 2,117 vessels of varying classes, from nimble corvettes to massive dreadnoughts. Status report, Grayson demanded, his weathered face illuminated by the blue glow of the tactical displays. All ships report ready, Commander Tessa Montgomery replied, her fingers dancing over the holographic interface. The Hammer of Dawn battle group has completed loading the Nova warheads. The Shadow Strike stealth fleet has engaged their quantum camouflage systems. The Sunbreaker heavy artillery vessels are charged to 130% capacity. Grayson nodded, running a hand through his salt and pepper hair. And the planet crackers? The Leviathan, Behemoth, and Titan are all operational, sir, came the reply. Singularity Core is stable. Reality shear weapons are primed. Good, Grayson murmured. He turned to the communications officer. Any word from Commander Vanson? Transmitting now, sir. Full data packet on the Void Scourge and Council defensive capabilities. The bridge fell into a tense silence as the senior officers reviewed the information. Grayson's frown deepened with each passing moment. This is worse than we thought, Tessa Montgomery finally said, voicing what everyone was thinking. The Scourge isn't just consuming matter, she continued, her voice grave. It's unraveling the fabric of space-time itself. And the Council's response? Committees. Grayson's disbelief slipped into his voice. They've known about this threat for years and they've done nothing but talk. Different evolutionary paths, sir, offered Chief Science Officer Isaac Taylor. Most Council species evolved in environments with minimal threats. No predators, stable climates, abundant resources. They never developed our fight or flight responses. Lucky them, Grayson said, his voice dry. Must be nice. They're not built for conflict, Taylor continued, his tone almost clinical. Their entire civilization is based on consensus and cooperation. The idea of preemptive military action doesn't even exist in their vocabulary. Grayson shook his head, then straightened his uniform with a crisp motion. Well, it's not alien to us. Lieutenant Park, signal all ship captains. We're holding a priority briefing in 30 minutes. The briefing took place through a holographic conference with the captains of all 2,117 vessels projected in the Nemesis's war room. Grayson didn't waste time with pleasantries. The situation is simple, he began, bringing up a three-dimensional map of the affected sectors. An entity we're calling the Void Scourge is consuming entire star systems at an accelerating rate. It doesn't negotiate, it doesn't communicate, it simply consumes. The map lit up, showing the Scourge's path of destruction, a growing darkness spreading across the galaxy. The Galactic Council has formally requested our assistance, Grayson continued, his voice steady. They've suspended the quarantine on human ships and are granting us unrestricted access to Council space. About damn time, muttered Captain Rex Williams of the USS Thunderchild. We've been warning them about this for 3 years. Nevertheless, Grayson pressed on, this is what humanity has been preparing for since we first looked up at the stars and wondered if we were truly alone. Not first contact with peaceful aliens, but the grim realization that the universe is as dangerous as Earth ever was. He zoomed the map, highlighting the fleet's planned approach vector. We'll deploy in 3 phases. First, intelligence gathering. Our stealth vessels will map the Scourge's structure and pinpoint any weaknesses. Second, containment. The Hammerfall and Aegis battle groups will form a perimeter to halt further expansion. Finally, engagement. The heavy artillery vessels. He paused, allowing the words to sink in. The planet crackers will deliver the main assault. Sir, Captain Lila Wong of the USS Leviathan interjected, her voice laced with concern. The planet crackers have never been deployed in actual combat. Simulations suggest the collateral damage could be catastrophic. I'm aware, Captain, Grayson replied grimly, but we're not fighting for territory or resources. We're fighting for the survival of all life in this galaxy, our own included. He scanned the faces of the assembled captains, humanity's finest warriors, commanding the most destructive weapons ever created. The Council species may not understand what it means to fight, he said quietly, but they're about to learn what it means when humans decide to wage war. His tone turned firm. Prepare your ships. We depart for Council space in 6 hours. The Grand Council observation deck was filled to its maximum capacity. Representatives from every member species pressed against the massive, transparent aluminum viewport, their eyes, sensory organs, and perception apparatuses, all fixed on the emptiness of space before them. Are we sure they're coming? Chancellor Trellernos Kirix's gelatinous form quivered, a subtle sign of anxiety. Perhaps they reconsidered after reviewing the data. They're coming, Commander Vanson assured him, glancing at her chronometer. Humans are punctual, especially when it comes to matters of war. Jackson, standing beside Vanson, couldn't contain the nervous energy coursing through him. How will they arrive? He asked, voice tight with anticipation. Through the established jump point? He suggested, his antennae twitching. Vanson gave a sly smile. No, that would be too predictable. As if on cue, space itself seemed to ripple, not at the jump point where all Council vessels passed through, but directly ahead of the station. The ripple spread into a distortion, which grew into a massive tear, an aperture swirling with energy. By the 7 moons, whispered Zirana, her scales flushing an almost purplish hue. They're here. The human ships came through the rift in perfect formation. First came sleek black vessels that appeared to bend light around them, stealth scouts. Then, larger ships bristling with weapon systems that made the Council's defensive arrays look like children's toys. And finally, 3 massive dreadnoughts, each at least 20 times the size of the largest Council vessel, the planet crackers. Those are the USS Leviathan, Behemoth, and Titan, Vanson stated, with a hint of pride. The representatives fell into a stunned silence. The human ships were wrong. Where the Council vessels were elegant, with sweeping curves and aesthetic designs, these ships were angular, utilitarian, and unmistakably built for one purpose: destruction. "They're magnificent," Jackson whispered in awe. "They're terrifying," Varelli's Tharkin murmured, unable to tear his gaze away. Vanson smiled slightly. "They're both." A collective gasp rippled through the observation deck as the three planet crackers assumed their positions. Panels on their hulls opened, revealing black spheres of nothing. Not darkness, but sheer absence. "Contained singularity cores," Vanson explained, as if discussing the weather. "Miniaturized black holes, harnessed as power sources." "Impossible," whispered a Karaztai scientist. "The energy requirements alone would—" "The energy requirements are substantial," Vanson agreed. "Hence the antimatter reactors as secondary power systems." Chancellor Trellernes's translator emitted a high-pitched whine of distress. "You power your ships with black holes and antimatter? And don't forget the fusion drives for standard propulsion," Vanson added helpfully. The observation deck erupted in alarmed chatter, clicks, whistles, and chemical signals of distress. Representative Hannah Ryder's environmental suit bubbled so vigorously that warning lights began flashing. "Attention, Council Station!" A booming voice filled the communication systems. "This is Admiral Ethan Grayson of the United Earthship Nemesis. We are assuming defensive position Alpha. Please stand by for further instructions." The term "assuming defensive position" struck many representatives as odd, given that the human fleet had arranged itself in what was clearly an attack formation. But none dared question it. "Commander Vanson," the Admiral's voice continued, softer this time, "please report to the Nemesis for a tactical briefing." Vanson straightened. "Acknowledged, Admiral. On my way." She turned to Jackson and the other representatives. "Well, you asked for humanity's most lethal ships. There they are." As Vanson made her way to the exit, Jackson hurried after her. "Commander, I'd like to accompany you to observe the briefing, if permitted." Vanson paused and studied the alien with a newfound respect. "Most of your kind are hiding behind their environmental suits right now, Representative Jackson. Are you sure you want to board a human warship?" Jackson's mandibles clicked, a sound that could have been nervousness or excitement. "Yes," he said with surprising certainty. "I'm sure." "The Void Scourge terrifies me far more than humans do," Vanson said, a grin pulling at her lips, revealing those flat, omnivorous teeth that unsettled many council species. "That's the first sensible thing I've heard a council member say in years," she added with a slight chuckle. "Come on then, let's introduce you to real monsters." The battle with the Void Scourge unfolded exactly as human scientists had predicted. 43 hours after the fleet's arrival, one moment space was empty. The next, the familiar inky darkness began to seep into reality, like watercolor bleeding into wet paper. "Contact, contact, contact!" called out the tactical officer aboard the Nemesis. Admiral Grayson, standing at the command platform, didn't flinch. "Execute battle plan Thermop," he ordered, his voice calm and steady. "Stealth Group, commence active scanning. Hammer Group, establish containment perimeter. Artillery vessels, charge primary weapons, planet crackers, maintain position Alpha." Jackson, granted observer status on the bridge, watched in awe as the humans operated with chilling efficiency. There was no panic, no frantic discussions or debates, only crisp orders and immediate execution. "Is that it?" Jackson asked, pointing at the spreading darkness on the view screen. "That's the entity that has consumed 18 star systems?" "That's just what we can see," Commander Vanson explained, her voice flat. "The visible manifestation is a dimensional shadow, a two-dimensional projection of a multidimensional entity. It's like trying to understand a cube by looking at its shadow." "Fascinating," murmured Science Officer Isaac Taylor. "And terrifying," Jackson added under his breath. The stealth vessels disappeared from visual sensors as they activated their quantum camouflage. The defensive perimeter tightened as the Hammer Group moved into position, their weapons powering up with a low hum that Jackson could feel in his exoskeleton. "Stealth Group reports successful penetration of the outer boundary," announced Communications Officer Lena Carter. "Transmitting scan data now." The holographic display in the center of the bridge flickered, showing a three-dimensional representation of the Void Scourge's true form. Jackson's compound eyes widened in horror. The creature, if it could even be called that, was a writhing mass of geometrically impossible angles and non-Euclidean shapes. constantly folding in on itself in ways that hurt to even look at. "By the seven moons," he whispered in awe. "It's beautiful, in a way. Like looking at the face of entropy itself," Grayson remarked dispassionately, his eyes studying the display. Taylor's fingers flew across his console. "Analysis complete, Admiral. The entity exists partially in 11-dimensional space, which is how it's able to consume matter so completely. It doesn't destroy it. It simply relocates the energy and matter to dimensions we can't access." "Can we kill it?" Grayson asked bluntly. Taylor hesitated, glancing at the data. "Theoretically, yes. The scan reveals what appears to be a central mass, possibly a nucleus or brain-like structure. If we can target that with sufficient force being the combined output of all three planet crackers firing their reality shear weapons simultaneously," Grayson finished for him. Taylor nodded. "That would do it." Grayson turned to face the view screen, his jaw set. "Make it happen." What followed was a ballet of destruction, choreographed with terrifying precision. The stealth vessels marked the target coordinates, while the Hammer Group created a containment field to prevent the Scourge from escaping. The artillery vessels opened fire, their energy beams seemingly swallowed by the darkness without effect. "Phase 1 complete," announced Captain Tessa Montgomery. "Containment at 97% efficiency." "The Scourge is reacting," Isaac Taylor warned, his voice rising with alarm. "It's attempting to shift fully into our dimensional plane." On the view screen, the darkness began to pulse and expand, reaching tendrils toward the defensive perimeter. Where those tendrils touched, sensor contacts winked out. Council observation stations vanished in an instant. "Phase 2 initiated," Grayson ordered, his voice unwavering despite the escalating situation. "Planet crackers moved to attack positions." The three massive dreadnoughts broke formation, surrounding the Scourge in a triangular pattern. Their hulls split open further, revealing enormous weapon arrays, complex geometric structures that bent light around them, unlike anything Jackson had ever seen. Not cannons or missile launchers, but devices that seemed to manipulate the very fabric of reality. "Reality shear weapons primed," reported Captain Lila Wong from the Leviathan. "Targeting central mass." "Fire," Grayson commanded, his voice cutting through the tension. Three beams of what looked like liquid darkness shot forth from the planet crackers, converging on the center of the Void Scourge. Where they met, space itself seemed to tear open, not a clean cut, but a jagged wound in reality. The Scourge writhed, its tendrils flailing wildly. A concept of a sound, translated into sensory input, filling every mind on the bridge. It was like a scream, but not quite. "Direct hit," Taylor announced, his voice a mix of awe and excitement. "The nucleus is destabilizing." The tear in space expanded, consuming the Scourge from within. The darkness began to fold in on itself, collapsing like a dying star. "It's working," Jackson breathed, hardly daring to believe what he was seeing. "Phase 3, Grayson ordered, his expression grim. "All ships retreat to minimum safe distance. Nova warheads, deploy on my mark." Aftermath. 3 weeks after what was now being called the Void War, the Grand Council convened for a special session. The chamber, usually arranged in neat concentric circles, had been reconfigured to accommodate a new delegation, 20 human representatives, including Admiral Grayson, Commander Vanson, and the captains of the major vessels. Chancellor Trellernos's gelatinous form pulsed with formal colors of gratitude as he addressed the assembly on behalf of all Council species. "I extend our profound thanks to the human fleet," he said, his voice echoing across the chamber. "Without your intervention, the Void Scourge would have continued its path of destruction until nothing remained. We acknowledge that we were unprepared for such a threat." Jackson, seated in a position of honor near the humans, couldn't help but add, "Unprepared is an understatement. We were helpless, paralyzed by indecision and bureaucracy. The Void Scourge would have filled out our extinction forms in triplicate before we even finished our first emergency committee meeting," he added with a sharp laugh. Nervous laughter rippled through the chamber. Even some of the humans smiled. Admiral Grayson stood, his weathered face solemn. "The threat has been neutralized," he began, "but at significant cost. We lost 17 ships and over 1,200 personnel," Grayson said, his voice carrying the weight of the truth. "The dimensional rift created by the planet crackers will take years to fully stabilize. But the Void Scourge is gone, and our scientists are confident it won't be returning." "And what happens now?" Representative Zillax asked, his exoskeleton pulsing with fluctuating colors, still showing signs of stress. Will humanity return to quarantine? Will you retreat behind your borders once again? A murmur spread through the council members. Despite their initial fear of the human fleet, many now found the very idea of its departure even more unsettling. Grayson glanced at Commander Vanson, who nodded in agreement, her expression unreadable. Earth proposes a new arrangement, Grayson announced, his tone resolute and calm. The quarantine was based on fear, your fear of our capacity for violence, and perhaps our fear of losing our identity within the galactic community. But the Void Scourge has taught us all an important lesson. The universe is far more dangerous than any of us had realized. He motioned toward the human delegation. We offer a defensive pact. Human ships will patrol council space and will establish joint military training programs. In return, we ask for full integration into galactic society, trade, cultural exchange, and technological cooperation. Chancellor Trellernos's colors shifted rapidly, his gelatinous form quivering as he processed the proposal. The Council has always been a peaceful organization, he said slowly, almost as if testing the words. We've never needed military protection before. With respect, Chancellor, Vanson interjected, her voice firm but respectful. You've never needed it because you've been fortunate. The galaxy isn't the calm, ordered place your evolutionary history prepared you for. It's wild, chaotic like Earth. Jackson stood, his presence commanding attention as he addressed both the humans and the council members. We evolved in different environments, developing different strengths, he began, his tone measured but thoughtful. The humans adapted to survive constant threats. We, on the other hand, adapted to build consensus and cooperation. But perhaps both are needed if we are to truly thrive among the stars. He turned to face Grayson. Your ships terrified us. Your weapons defy everything we understand about physics. Your willingness to sacrifice lives, even your own, for the greater good was alien to us. Jackson's mandibles formed the closest approximation of a smile that his physiology allowed. And I've never been more grateful for anything in my life. Grayson extended his hand, a human gesture of agreement, which had been introduced in the cultural briefing packets. After a moment's hesitation, Jackson extended his upper right appendage, and they clasped hands. To new beginnings, Grayson said, his voice steady and sincere. And to the Deathworlders, Jackson replied, his voice filled with quiet admiration. Who taught us how to survive?